The year was 1865, and the western frontier stretched vast and wild, both a land of dreams and despair. Three sisters, Clara, Evelyn, and Margaret, sat beside a dying fire, their figures hunched against the creeping cold of dusk. The wind whistled through brittle branches, whispering secrets of the unforgiving terrain. Their husbands had left that morning with the promise of returning by midday, saddlebags filled with supplies. But the sun had dipped below the horizon, and still the men had not come back. Clara, the eldest, gritted her teeth, staring toward the distant trail they had taken. The dry prairie yawned before them, endless and silent. "They should have been back by now," Evelyn murmured, hugging her arms close. Her blue eyes darted at Clara, searching for reassurance, but there was none to give. "Maybe they lost their way," Margaret, the youngest, suggested, though doubt curled at the edge of her words. Clara said nothing. She already knew the truth. She had seen the shift in the men's eyes over the last few weeks. The glances exchanged when they thought the women weren't looking, the way their tempers had grown short, their touch cruel. The journey west had been hard, breaking more than just wagon wheels. The land was merciless, and so were men when faced with failure. A cold certainty settled in Clara's stomach as she stood, brushing dirt from her worn skirts. "We need to check their tracks." Margaret's face paled. What if something happened to them? Clara didn't answer. She stepped beyond the glow of the fire, boots pressing into dry earth. The prairie smelled of dust and old grass, the scent of emptiness. Moving cautiously, she followed the faint imprint of hoof prints leading away from camp. The pattern was clear, straight, unwavering. The men hadn't wandered. They had ridden with purpose. Her heart pounded. She traced the trail until it crested a small hill. Beyond it, the land stretched open and empty. No sign of a struggle. No sign of return. Only absence. Her breath hitched. They had been abandoned. The realization settled like a stone in her chest. A sharp wind cut through her, but it was not the cold that made her shiver. It was rage. By the time she returned to camp, her sisters had already sensed the worst. Evelyn stood rigid, fists clenched at her sides. Margaret, ever the hopeful one, met Clara's gaze with silent pleading. Clara's voice came steady and strong. "They're not coming back." Evelyn inhaled sharply. "No, that's not." "They left us, Evelyn," Clara snapped, harsher than she intended. "And they took the horses, the food, everything." Margaret's knees buckled, and she sank onto a log, staring at the fire with unseeing eyes. Evelyn turned, pacing, her breath ragged. "They wouldn't do this," she whispered. But even she didn't believe it. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. The vast loneliness of the prairie pressed in, suffocating. "What do we do?" Margaret finally asked, her voice small. Clara exhaled slowly. "We survive." She didn't say how. Night fell, swallowing them in ink-black darkness. The fire burned low, a feeble defense against the creeping cold. Every rustle in the grass sent their hearts pounding. They clutched their blankets close, though no cloth could keep out the fear. Clara stayed awake long after her sisters drifted into restless sleep. Her mind spun through possibilities, walking to the nearest settlement, following the men's trail in hopes of reclaiming what was stolen. But the nearest town was days away, and the tracks would lead only to betrayal. Morning came with the dry taste of hunger. Their supplies, stripped to nothing, left them scouring the land for anything edible. Margaret found a handful of wild berries, their tartness sharp on the tongue. It was barely enough to ease a gnawing emptiness in their bellies. By noon, thirst had become their greatest enemy. Evelyn's lips cracked, her voice raw. "We need water." Clara scanned the land. The nearest stream lay miles away, a journey that could cost them their strength. But there was no choice. They walked. Hours passed under the relentless sun, their steps growing sluggish. Margaret stumbled, and Evelyn caught her before she hit the ground. The youngest sister was pale, breath labored. "We have to rest," Evelyn said. "No," Clara pressed. "We stop, we die." Margaret whimpered but pushed forward, her determination flickering like a candle in the wind. At last they found it, a narrow, winding river cutting to the landscape like a dark ribbon. The sight sent relief crashing over them. Evelyn dropped to her knees, scooping water into her cupped hands, gulping it down. Margaret followed, too weak to care about the murkiness. Clara knelt, dipping her fingers into the cool liquid, letting the chill seep into her bones. For a moment they were saved. A twig snapped. Her head shot up. The air shifted, heavy with something unseen. Evelyn froze, droplets slipping from her fingertips. Margaret's breath came quick and shallow. Then voices. Deep, rough, unfamiliar. Clara's pulse thundered. She turned her head slowly. On the opposite bank, shadows moved between the trees. Men, 5 of them, their faces obscured by beards and dirt, their clothes tattered from hard living. One stepped forward, grinning. Well, what do we have here? Evelyn stiffened. Margaret gasped. Clara reached for the knife at her belt. The man chuckled. Easy now. His eyes roved over them, calculating. Didn't think we'd find such pretty things out here alone. Clara swallowed her fear, gripping the knife tighter. We're not alone. A lie. A desperate, obvious lie. The men laughed. One nudged his companion. Hear that? They got men waiting for 'em. Don't look like it. Another sneered. Look like 3 lost lambs to me. Clara's muscles coiled. If they ran, they wouldn't get far. If they fought, they would lose. The man took a step closer. No need to be unfriendly. We can help. Another step. Then, the sharp twang of a bowstring. An arrow hissed through the air, striking the man in the throat. His eyes went wide as he staggered back, blood spurting between his fingers. Chaos erupted. Shouts rang out as the remaining men scrambled, reaching for their weapons. Another arrow flew, striking true. A third followed, then a fourth. From the trees, figures emerged, tall, strong, moving with deadly precision. Clara barely had time to process before rough hands grabbed her, dragging her backward. She struggled, but the grip was firm, unyielding. The last thing she saw before darkness swallowed her was the flicker of firelight against bronze skin, the gleam of a blade catching the sun. Then nothing. Clara woke to the scent of smoke and earth. For a moment, she was adrift, the weight of exhaustion pressing her into the firs beneath her. Then memory struck. Men at the river, arrows slicing through the air, strong hands pulling her back. She sat up too quickly, and a sharp pain lanced through her skull. The world spun before steadying into focus. Around her, the flickering glow of a fire cast shadows against the walls of a large hide-covered lodge. Faint voices murmured beyond the entrance, the rhythmic cadence of a language she did not understand. Evelyn stirred beside her face pale but unhurt. Margaret lay curled near the fire, her breathing steady. Relief washed over Clara, but it was quickly replaced by weariness. They were alive, but at what cost? The lodge flap shifted, and a figure stepped inside. He was tall, his movements fluid as he approached. His gaze met Clara's, a deep, unreadable brown. She stiffened. "You are safe," he said in slow, careful English. Clara's fingers curled into the furs beneath her. "Where are we?" The man studied her before answering. "With my people." His tone was calm, but there was no mistaking the steel beneath it. Clara glanced at Evelyn, whose eyes remained shut, then at Margaret, who stirred slightly but did not wake. "Who are you?" she asked. "Chaska." The name was unfamiliar, sharp on her tongue. She studied him, noting the broad planes of his face, the confident way he held himself. He did not look at her with cruelty or amusement, only quiet assessment. "Why did you save us?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he crouched near the fire, adding a piece of wood. The flames flared, casting his face in golden shadow. "You were in danger," he said finally. "We do not let men like those take what they wish." Clara swallowed hard. The memory of those leering men, their intentions clear, sent a shiver down her spine. "Thank you," she said stiffly, the words unfamiliar between her lips. Chaska only nodded before rising. "Rest. You are safe for now." Then he was gone, leaving Clara with nothing but the crackle of flames and the weight of unanswered questions. The days that followed were a slow, careful dance. The sisters were watched but not mistreated. The Lakota women brought them food, fresh meat, berries, warm broth that soothed their aching stomachs. Margaret, ever the gentle one, was the first to speak with them, her quiet curiosity softening the distance. Evelyn, still raw from betrayal, remained wary. She flinched at the presence of the warriors, her gaze darting to the edge of the village as though expecting their husbands to come back for them. Clara observed. She listened. The Lakota were not what she had been taught to fear. They were not the savages her husband had spoken of with disdain. They were warriors, yes, but also craftsmen, mothers, fathers, children. One evening, as the sun bled across the sky, a woman named Red Sky knelt beside Margaret, showing her how to grind dried berries into a thick paste. Margaret's laughter rang out, soft, unguarded. Clara exhaled. That night, as the village settled into quiet, she stepped beyond the lodges, letting the cool air clear her thoughts. She did not hear him approach until he was beside her. "You watch everything," Chaska said. Clara turned to him. "I have to." His gaze lingered on her, searching. "Are you afraid?" The answer should have been yes. She should have been terrified, but she wasn't. "I don't know," she admitted. Chaska nodded as though he understood. "Fear can be wise," he said, "but it can also blind you." She met his gaze, something shifting in the space between them, a silent challenge. The village became their home in ways Clara had not expected. Days bled into weeks, and slowly, the sisters became part of the rhythm of life there. Margaret learned to weave, her small hands quick and eager. Evelyn, despite her resistance, found solace in tending the horses, brushing their coats until they gleamed under the sun. And Clara found herself drawn to Chaska. It was not immediate, nor was it gentle. He frustrated her, his quiet confidence unsettling, his presence always near, but never imposing. She had spent her life fighting to be heard, to be taken seriously. He did not challenge her with words, but with silence, forcing her to question things she had long held as truth. One evening, she sat by the river, the water reflecting the sky's last light. Footsteps approached, and she knew before looking who it was. "You don't speak much," she said, watching the water ripple. "You speak enough for both of us," he replied. She turned to him, half expecting a smirk, but found only sincerity. "Why do you watch me?" she asked. "Why do you watch me?" he countered. She had no answer. One night, a storm rolled over the plains, thunder shaking the earth. The sisters huddled inside their lodge, listening as rain battered the ground. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the village in quick, blinding flashes. Clara found herself restless, the energy of the storm coiling inside her. She stepped outside, the wind whipping at her hair. She didn't hear him approach, but she felt him. "You shouldn't be out here," Chaska said. "And yet, here you are," she countered. Lightning flared again, and for a moment, the world held still. His gaze burned into hers. There was something unspoken between them, something fragile yet unyielding. She did not step away. Neither did he. The storm passed, but the tension between them remained, unspoken yet understood. As the days stretched into months, their bond deepened, though neither gave voice to it. It was in the small moments, his fingers brushing against hers when handing her a tool, the way he stood closer than necessary, the rare but unmistakable warmth in his gaze. But peace was never meant to last. One morning, a scout rode into the village, his face dark with warning. He spoke quickly to the elders, his words sharp, urgent. Chaska listened, his expression turning to stone. Clara felt the shift before she knew the cause. "What is it?" she asked. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something she had never seen in him before. Rage. "Your husbands," he said. "They are coming." The words hit like a blow. Evelyn gasped. Margaret clutched at Clara's sleeve, eyes wide with terror. They think we were taken," Evelyn whispered. Clara swallowed the bitter truth. "No," she said. "They want to reclaim what they threw away." Chaska nodded. "They bring men. Guns." The village bristled with quiet preparation. Warriors gathered, arrows sharpened, rifles checked. The air thrummed with tension. Clara turned to Chaska. "What do we do?" His gaze lingered on her, something heavy, unspoken, between them. "You have a choice," he said. "You can run, or you can fight." She did not hesitate. "I will not run." He searched her face before giving a single, firm nod. The sky above darkened, the wind carrying the scent of war. And Clara knew this was the moment everything would change. The morning broke with an eerie stillness, the kind that came before a storm. The village was awake, warriors preparing in silence, hands steady as they tied arrows to quivers and checked the powder in their rifles. The women moved with quiet determination, gathering children, preparing for the worst. Clara stood at the edge of the camp, her heart pounding as she scanned the horizon. In the distance, a thin dust cloud curled into the sky. Their husbands were coming. Evelyn stood beside her, fists clenched. "They won't stop until they have us." "They don't have us now," Clara said firmly. Margaret swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if we don't survive?" Clara turned, gripping her sister's hands. "We have already survived them once. We will do it again." Chaska approached, his expression unreadable. "It is time." The village would not flee. This land was theirs, and they would not abandon it. The warriors had taken their positions, hidden along the tree line, the ridges, the river banks. Their numbers were fewer, but they knew the land. They had the advantage of patience, of strategy. Clara had never held a weapon with the intent to kill, but today she stood with bow in her hands, the weight of it foreign but not unwelcome. Chaska had placed it there himself. "You do not have to fight," he had told her the night before. "I cannot stand by and watch," she had replied. He had studied her for a long moment before nodding, then aimed true. Now, as she saw the first figures emerge in the dust, a dozen riders, their guns slung across their backs, their faces set with grim determination, she felt something shift inside her. Her husband, Samuel, led them. His eyes swept the village before landing on her, and for a moment he looked almost surprised, as if he had expected her to be broken begging. Instead, she stood tall, armed. His expression darkened. He rode forward, stopping just short of the boundary. "Clara," he called, "come to me." She did not move. Evelyn and Margaret flanked her, their presence solid at her sides. Samuel's lips pressed into a thin line. "Enough of this foolishness. You don't belong here." Clara lifted her chin. "And where do I belong, Samuel? With the man who left me to die." A flicker of something crossed his face, but it wasn't remorse. It was frustration. "You don't understand," he said. "We had no choice." "Yes, you did," Evelyn spat, "and you chose yourselves." Another man rode forward, his face familiar. Margaret let out a small gasp. Her husband, Henry, looked at her with something almost like regret. "Maggie," he said softly, "you need to come home." Margaret's fingers tightened around Clara's arm. Chaska stepped forward, his presence an undeniable force. He did not reach for his weapon, did not raise his voice, but his authority was absolute. "They are home," he said. Samuel's eyes snapped to him, his face twisting with disgust. "This isn't your concern." "It became my concern the moment you left them to die." The riders shifted uneasily. Some glanced at one another, their resolve faltering. Perhaps they had not expected resistance. Perhaps they had not thought of the women as anything but property to be reclaimed. Samuel straightened. "We're taking them back." "No," Clara said, her voice clear and steady. "You're not." His expression darkened, and in that instant she saw the truth. He had not come for love, nor even for guilt. He had come because he could not bear the thought of losing control. The moment stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring. Then Samuel reached for his gun. A single arrow sliced through the air. His hand never made it to his holster. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked, arrows flew. The warriors moved with precision, striking before the riders could react. Horses reared, men shouted. The scent of gunpowder thickened the air. Clara ducked behind a wagon, her breath coming fast. She saw Evelyn grab a knife from the ground, saw Margaret press herself against a tree, eyes wide with fear. Samuel was still standing, rage twisting his features. He locked eyes with Clara and charged. She scrambled backward, reaching for an arrow with trembling fingers. She barely had time to knock it before he was on her, his hand striking out, knocking the bow from her grasp. She fell hard, the impact stealing her breath. He loomed over her, face shadowed with fury. "You ungrateful." Before he could finish, a figure slammed into him, sending him sprawling. Chaska! He stood between them, his stance deadly calm. Samuel staggered to his feet, reaching for his knife, but Chaska was faster. One strike, a blur of motion. Samuel gasped, his body going still. He clutched his side, blood seeping through his fingers. His eyes met Clara's, wide with something that might have been disbelief. Then he crumpled. The fight ended swiftly. The riders, realizing their leader was down, turned and fled, some wounded, others too afraid to continue. The Lakota did not chase them. They had won. The village stood in silence, the weight of what had happened settling over them. Clara stared at Samuel's lifeless body, waiting for grief, for guilt. But she felt nothing. Chaska turned to her, his gaze searching. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. He reached out hesitant, but when she did not pull away, his fingers brushed against hers. Evelyn and Margaret stepped closer, their faces unreadable. Margaret exhaled shakily. "It's over." Clara looked at her sisters, alive, whole, free. "No," she said, her voice strong. "It's just beginning."